Good afternoon. On behalf of our Executive Director, Stephen Aquario, and the rest of the NISAC team, I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. We appreciate the members and guests who have joined all of our virtual legislative conference webinars and are really looking forward to this session on the legislative proposals to legalize adult use cannabis. My name is Alex Lamont, and I am a Legislative and Policy Coordinator for NISAC, and I'll be moderating this event. Before we get started, Jeanette, are there any housekeeping items you'd like to address?
Yes, Alex. I want to let everyone know that we will be recording this session, posting it with a PDF of the slide deck on the NISAC website at www.nisac.org/education. During the program, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please submit it in writing on your dashboard under the questions tab. If you click on it, it'll drop down, give you a space to type in your questions and then just submit it. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the program. Hopefully we'll get to everybody's questions. Alex?
Thank you, Jeanette. Now I'd like to introduce NISAC's president, the Honorable Jack Marin of Ontario County, who will introduce our speakers and our sponsor for this afternoon's webinar. Jack, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and to our speakers, thank you very much for providing us with your time and your knowledge. We very much appreciate it. We will get underway in a moment, but we do want to first thank our sponsor for this session, Ease Technologies, LLC. Ease is a cannabis marketplace and company that provides safe, legal access via delivery to adults across California. Their mission is to bring enjoyment and convenience to their customers, break down barriers to access, and build community in everything they do through their social impact and equity programs. Our special guest speakers today are, speaker number one is the Honorable Crystal Stokes, Majority Leader, New York State Assembly. In December of 2018, Assemblywoman Crystal D. Stokes was elevated to the position of Majority Leader of the New York State Assembly. Stokes has served Buffalo's 141st Assembly District since 2003. Our second speaker is Axel Bernabe, Assistant Counsel for Health, Office of the Governor. Axel Bernabe is Assistant Counsel to Governor Andrew M. Cuomo, overseeing legal and policy deliberations in the health portfolio. As part of his responsibilities, he oversees the implementation of all initiatives related to medical, hemp, and adult use cannabis. Over the last 5 years, he has supervised the expansion of the medical program and implementation of the state's hemp program. Axel is also responsible for driving the administration's proposal for comprehensive regulation of all segments of the cannabis economy, including the creation of a new Office of Cannabis Management that would permit the implementation of an adult use program. Our third and final speaker is Norman Byronbaum, Director of Cannabis Programs, Office of the Governor. Norman Byronbaum was appointed as New York State's Director of Cannabis Programs in December of 2019. As Director, he oversees the regulation, administration, and policy development for the state's medical marijuana and industrial hemp programs. Mr. Byronbaum is also charged with spearheading Governor Cuomo's proposal to legalize cannabis for adult use. Before joining the Cuomo administration, Mr. Byronbaum established Rhode Island's Office of Cannabis Regulation and served as the office's first implementation director when he oversaw Rhode Island's medical marijuana and industrial hemp programs and led Governor Gina Raimondo's effort to legalize cannabis for adult use. It is now my honor to turn this program over to the Majority Leader.
Hi, how are you all? It's a great honor to be here with you today, at least by voice. I am actually headed home. We did just finish our session, but it's great to be having this conversation, particularly with the two gentlemen that you introduced as well, Norm and Axel. I had the pleasure to conversate with them on a regular basis on this topic, and I'm actually feeling pretty good about where we are in terms of MARTA and the governor's proposal. I think that we're probably closer to passage this year than we have been in the previous 7 years since I've introduced the bill, or the previous 3 years since the governor has added this proposal to his budget. So it's an exciting time. There are some differences, but in my opinion, and I hope in the opinion of your other speakers, that these differences are things that will be worked out, and we'll be on our way to becoming a state, much like those that are surrounding us geographically, as well as a country, becoming a state that allows the taxation and use of adult marijuana.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader. We very much appreciate you joining us and appreciate all of the work you have done on behalf of our county governments. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Axel and Norm from the governor's office to talk about the governor's proposal to legalize adult use cannabis in this year's executive budget.
Thanks, Alex. Norm and I are going to sort of tag team this as we usually do. We go, we have a PowerPoint. There you go. I'll kick it off, maybe, Norm, if you don't mind, just set the stage a little bit on the history of how we kind of got here, and then we'll go through the slides. I mean, the purpose of the PowerPoint really is to provide a bit of a broad overview of the proposal as we've introduced it over the last several years, and you know, it's always hard with a bill this size to touch on every issue, because it just touches so many aspects of our daily life and of public life, and so we've done our best, but we've kept it pretty high level. And before we jump in, just to the Majority Leader statements, you know, we concur that the time has sort of come to get this done, and that there's a lot more support nationally and at the state level to get this done this time around, that the MRTA, which is the legislative bill, and the CRTA, which is the governor's bill, are really just not that far apart, and so there really should be no obstacle to getting this done over the next five weeks. So we're hopeful that happens as well, and we can undertake the task of building out the program, which will itself take some time. And so to the extent that counties are thinking about what it means for them, we've always said, I know this is a line we've used a lot in the past years, for those that have heard this presentation before, but this is really the starting gun. It's not the end line of the race. It's really the starting gun for standing up the program. It'll take 12 to 18 months to just issue the licenses, let alone implement the actual sales and really get going. So we all have time to work together on this, and we really do want to be partners with the counties on making sure that this gets done responsibly. So just as a quick overview, and then I'll turn it to Norm. This is probably one of my favorite slides, because it really captures what we're trying to do here. And my background is in public health, and that was really the impetus for this. When the national trend has been to move away from criminalization of drug policy, and I think that's becoming a fairly big consensus. And it started with sort of needle exchange programs at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and started to move towards the notion that we really should be looking at drug policy through a health lens, and not a criminal law lens. And that's what we've tried to do. While we like to talk of the three stools of the program being public safety, social justice, and economic development, they all do actually feed into a public health framework. So everything we do is with public health in mind. Even social justice is both about remedying past harms, as well as it is of avoiding continuing disparities in health equity. So that's how this is structured, and we can sort of jump into the nitty-gritty of the bill. That'll give you a sense of where the policy's headed if we go to the next slide. I don't know, Norm, if you want to jump on that one about the establishment of the office.
Absolutely. Thanks, Axel, and thanks everyone for having us here today. So the governor's proposal would establish a new Office of Cannabis Management, and right now we have a couple different areas of the cannabis economy that are tended to by different agencies. Agriculture and Markets oversees the industrial hemp program, and until very recently that included both industrial hemp as an agricultural crop and also the extracted products from industrial hemp. Those extracts recently went over to the Department of Health, which has expertise because they have been the licensing and regulatory authority for the medical cannabis program here in the state since it was founded about 5 years ago. But this Office of Cannabis Management would oversee cannabinoid hemp products, so those products which are commonly referred to as CBD products or other products that are derived from industrial hemp, the medical program, and then the new adult use program. The office would be nestled within the SLA, the State Liquor Authority, but it would be an independent office. The office would be overseen by a 5-member control board, and the control board would really set the stage for the regulations and the licensing. They would make all marketing decisions and market decisions in terms of the market architecture and how the license structure is set up. They would have control over price controls. They would craft and approve the social and economic equity plan, which is a very, very central part of the governor's proposal. And then they would also serve as an appellate board. So the office would then take that framework and oversee the day-to-day implementation of the licensing, the regulations, the tracking, everything that needs to happen under the bill in order to have a safe and highly regulated industry. But if there were ever appeals to a office determination, those would then go back up to the board. The board would also establish advisory committees, and there will be anticipated many advisory committees on different regulatory areas, from packaging and labeling to impaired driving to youth use or youth prevention, any number of topics. And then the control board would also oversee the promulgation of regulations, which then the office under an executive director would execute. The budget as proposed for operations, you can see $34 million, and it would be almost 210 employees over a ramp-up period. And one of the things that's built into the structure is deputy director positions for social and economic equity to make sure that there is proper staffing and accountability for those initiatives and programs. And we'll get a little bit to what the social equity program will look like in another slide, but also then a deputy director of public health and safety. This is someone who needs to be a healthcare professional, whether it's an MD or a pharmacist or some other related practitioner, to have oversight over the clinical aspects of both the medical program and the adult use program and cannabinoid hemp programs to make sure that the most up-to-date clinical science and data is informing all the rules and regulations and policies of the office. I think we can go over to the next slide. Axel, do you want to take this one? Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. So you'll recall the way this bill was structured, and it's partly like Norm said, to bring all of the expertise under one roof. The way we've structured this law is to have the medical program, the adult use program, and the hemp program set out in one place, and that's reflected in the law. So Article 3 you'll see is about medical cannabis, Article 4 is about adult use, and Article 5 is about hemp. It just keeps it sort of easier. And we already have a medical program in place, so we've had it for 5 years. So we're going to take that law out of the public health law and put it into this. So that's what it does. It repeals and replaces what's known as the Compassionate Care Act, which is the medical marijuana program, which, just one point to be made on this is we've had this program now in place for sales started in 2017, but and so we've had it in place for 4 years plus. And we really have not had any sort of, no concerns on diversion of product, abuse of the product, underuse sales, spike in driving. I know it's a small program, only 135,000 patients, but by way of a pilot program, I think if done properly, this does lend credibility to the idea that you can tax and regulate cannabis. It's also provided us a lot of evidence about the way that cannabis is used medicinally, and further sort of supported the position that you can't deny that it's got medical benefits, and that a Schedule 1 characterization of this compound is not rational. So in that vein, we are considering expanding the medical conditions. The idea is that doctors are in a better position than either the legislature or the agency to determine, how people should use their medicine. We are creating a new research license, which should allow folks to get in and grow, process, and research the product without having to get in and sell it, which is actually fairly popular in the state, and could create jobs and opportunities in in areas of the state focused on cannabinoid sciences. And we're going to make sure that anybody who participates is going to be through a competitive RFP process that maximizes the revenues to the states and kicks off the program properly. So we can move to the next slide on adult use. Oh, we might want to jump one more. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so a little bit about the market structure here, and what the governor's proposal contains is it's a two-tier market structure. So this is similar to the alcohol model, although alcohol is a three-tier, right? So you have the distinction between your retailer, your distributor, and then your manufacturer. Here, what we have is a iron curtain between the retailers and then those that would engage in either distribution, manufacturing, or cultivation. And that's to ensure that we have an equitable market and making sure that no one is able to manipulate the market or consolidate the market, and making sure that no one's able to have a monopoly over any specific aspect of the market is very, very
and what it said about comments that I had made.
I'm not sure who that was, but I'm going to continue on here. Is essential to our goals for having equitable industry. Even within the retail tier of licenses, no one can have more than 3 retail locations to make sure that we don't see a consolidation on the retail side. We do envision there to be a limited number of retail establishments throughout the state. We want to make sure that there is inherent value in those licenses, and also are concerned about oversaturation of distribution and what that means for both communities and access. And the goal here is to make sure that we're absorbing the existing market, which prohibition has done nothing to curtail, but not incentivizing use. And so that's part of our market architecture here in terms of the two-tier system, and then overall caps on the number of retail establishments. In terms of license types, we envision cultivation, micro businesses, which are smaller scale businesses but can engage in all 3 tiers. This is the one exception, but because they are small in terms of their scale and resources, it doesn't pose a threat to any of the other conditions that I previously spoke about, to make sure that we have an egalitarian market. And then cooperative licenses to allow for cooperative models of cultivation or other means of cannabis commerce, processors who would be involved in extracting from biomass and infusing products with cannabis, and then distributors and retailers. Axel spoke a little bit on the last slide about the selection criteria. So the governor's proposal contains an RFP model to ensure that there's an equal playing field and that we have adequate competition for the market, and that no one's handed anything that they're not qualified for. That being said, the social and economic equity program does prioritize any applicant that satisfies those requirements, and that's a little bit further down at the bottom of the slide. But the social and economic equity program encourages individuals from communities or who personally receive disproportionate enforcement from cannabis prohibition to be able to participate in the industry. And those statutory authority that goes into the social and economic equity program includes priority in licensing or specific geographic areas, reduced or deferred application fees, access to business development, incubation program, mentorship from others that are already in the industry and have the technical knowledge and expertise or IP to be able to share with those participants, and then 0 or low interest loans to help them have access to capital to start these businesses. And perhaps the largest change from previous proposals is the governor's establishment of a $100 million social and economic equity fund, which would go into communities that saw disproportionate impacts from the war on drugs and help to revitalize those communities. And that would be $100 million over the first 4 years on an escalating allocation of 10, 20, 30, then 40 million, and thereafter it would be 50 million a year. The other thing I want to mention is back up to the point of quality control and consumer protections. So all products within the regulated market would undergo laboratory testing for mold, microbial, pesticides, heavy metals, residual solvents, any type of contaminant to make sure that the products are as safe as possible. There'd be strict controls over packaging, labeling, advertising, marketing, and we have a great road to follow from states that have come before us that stumbled along the way, but they've cleared the path so that we can do this in a way that is as pragmatic as possible, making sure that we don't contribute to any potential externalities when it comes to cannabis use. I think the next slide. So Axel, do you want to talk about cannabinoid hemp?
Sure. So Article 5 is what we were saying before about the cannabinoid hemp program. So this is the hemp side of the equation. Hemp is a very versatile, cannabis sativa generally, but hemp in particular, a very versatile plant. So there are components to hemp that involve burgeoning industry related to textiles and biocomposites and food and oils, and that are not cannabinoid, meaning that are not these sort of active compounds that can be derived from the plant to use for health and wellness purposes. So when it comes to growing the plant, when it comes to using it for industrial purposes, that jurisdiction still remains with the Department of Agriculture, and they still license those entities. But the moment you begin to use the cannabis plant as hemp, and I should just, for those that may be new to the file, hemp is really the same cannabis plant, but it has 0.3% THC. So it just has a very, very nominal amount of THC that won't get you high, and so that's why it's been federally legalized as of 2018, and so is allowed to be used, cultivated, and licensed. And the USDA licenses hemp cultivators, or excuse me, in some states, and the states do it in others. But the office will be dealing with the hemp processors that extract cannabinoids from the plant and use it for human consumption. So they'll have to get a license to be a processor, to be a manufacturer, and to be even a retailer or distributor. So we're going to have a fairly robust but much lighter touch than in adult use or medical system, where we'll know, who is extracting oil from the plant and how it's being sold in the state. So we have a bit of a sense of that industry and that supply chain. The regulations were put out in October of last year, and we've gotten a lot of comments. And you've probably heard about it if you're upstate, related to some issues around hemp flour, and some of the license requirements. We've revised our regulations in that regard, and we'll be issuing a new version of them over the next couple of weeks, and those will go into effect likely in around April. As this points out, there will be similar quality control standards, meaning, in fact, the lab testing requirements are going to be very, very similar, if not identical, to the adult use one. So you're testing for pesticides and other contaminants, but they don't have to track every plant and every product the same way. But you do still have some standards on labeling and disclaimers and warnings. So that'll be under the new office as well. And I think we've taken a leadership position in this space nationally just by virtue of the rigor of our regulatory framework. So that's our Article 5 on cannabinoid hemp products. We can move to the next slide.
So speaking on taxation, this is another area where we did have some tweaks from last year's proposal. So we have a new tax structure. Last year's proposal had a weight-based excise tax and then a wholesale ad valorem value-based tax. This year we have shifted away from that weight-based approach towards a THC volume tax, and this is kind of the next iteration of the weight-based taxes that we've seen implemented in a bunch of other states. And after speaking with them about the administrative burdens that come with making sure that the right plant material is properly classified, categorized, weighed at the right time, and then some other challenges in terms of tracking along the supply chain, the value that's imparted on different parts of the plant based on weight really comes down to their THC content. So by shifting this to the actual milligrams of THC in a particular product and then weighing that tax amount based off of both market value, but then also what the impact of the THC is on the user through that product form, we have a far more precise and efficient tax mechanism here. It is something we're very excited about. It's something we've received a lot of positive feedback from various tax foundations and think tanks and organizations. It's seen as kind of a next step looking at what both Canada and the state of Illinois have done, growing from just simple weight-based taxes. And so it's something that we hope to see reflected in the final bill. And then the other change that we have on the tax rate is that the wholesale excise tax was moved to the retail level. So this is 10.25%, and the standard sales tax will apply. Local governments will receive the rate of whatever the existing local sales tax distribution structure is, with the majority of local sales taxes being approximately 4%.
So this is a quick slide on some of the assumptions we built in on the economic impact of legalization. There have been a number of studies that have come out and they've refined it based on some of the evidence we've seen in other states, and it's fairly impressive overall. The new industry has, we believe, the potential to create significant economic opportunities throughout the state, and this isn't just limited to sort of industrial areas because of the agricultural component and the industrial and processing component. The tax collections are projected to reach about 350 million annually, a little bit higher at this point. We revised them slightly higher in light of the tax estimate that Norm was just talking about. Norm mentioned the new social justice fund, which has $100 million earmarked for the first 5 years, actually, and then 50 million every year thereafter. Just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the project, we're expecting we'll need at first at least 700 to 1,000 retail locations. That is not, just to compare that to liquor stores, I believe we have about 3,300 liquor stores in the state. So we're not looking to have as many retailers as there are liquor stores, maybe a third, but that should be enough to supply the market and keep them profitable businesses that don't need to sort of revert to aggressive sales techniques or lowering their prices in order to sell the product. So we think that's a good way of making sure that the businesses survive and that they don't have sort of cutthroat approaches to stuff. On the cultivator and processor side, we're imagining anywhere from 150 to 250 cultivators and processors, and those will be split. We estimate we need quite a lot of production to fulfill the existing demand, and so there will be ample opportunity for larger and smaller participants to grow if they want to make some extra income if they're a farmer. And we will allow for a couple of vertically integrated medical operators to transition. That's traditionally what's happened in every other state that's moved there, folks that have the know-how and have the facilities already up and running can start to produce for the market. And we already know that they're able to do it properly. So they'll be paying a fee for that, but they'll be able to participate as well in all likelihood. And in terms of job creation, Rockefeller Institute projects 30 to 60,000 potential jobs on a fairly conservative basis, and that should be fairly well spread out among the retail and the processing. Processing has a variety of types of jobs, from pharmacists to GMP specialists and workers, factory workers, to retail workers. So that should be an interesting component to this, and hopefully contribute to revitalization of certain areas in the state that have, that are in need of some economic stimulus. So we can go to the next slide.
So local control and municipal opt-out, obviously, area of focus for this group. All counties, comma, and cities with populations over 100,000 may opt out of any license category within their jurisdiction. We have placed a time frame for those localities to opt out and decide which licenses they will opt out of, and that would be December 31st, 2021. Municipalities may adopt local laws through their zoning powers pertaining to time, place, and manner of any adult use dispensaries that they do allow within their jurisdiction if they do not opt out. And these zoning requirements that we place at the state level for dispensaries are very similar to what we see for liquor stores in terms of 500 feet from any pre-existing school, and a similar approach to the liquor industry.
So this is quickly about traffic safety. So that's something we've heard a lot about, and we've been working with the governor's traffic safety committee, state police, in trying to come up with the best plan to deal with any potential impact on roadside safety. And the numbers and the metrics from other states are sort of mixed, meaning some folks have seen an uptick or claim they've seen an uptick, others claim they haven't really, but there hasn't been a sort of wave or huge noticeable impact of legalization in the various states that have legalized. Now we have a fairly dense urban environment, so we want to take extra special care here. And so we did do some fairly aggressive, we made some fairly aggressive proposals here that would introduce oral fluid or potentially other roadside detection pilots into stops that may have folks that are impaired while driving. So it's starting to move towards like a breathalyzer, towards a preliminary test to see if there is evidence of consumption of THC, which would then warrant either calling a DRE, a drug a recognition expert, or bringing the person back to the station for further blood work. That's what we're adding here is saliva and bodily fluids as field test options. There is a penalty for refusing to undergo assessment by a DRE, and which would be the same as refusing a breathalyzer. That's new, and this would help in traffic safety. Would help to really address not only THC, but there's been a desire to try to find an approach for other even prescription medicines, opioids and benzos and others that do impact your driving. So we should always remember that we're dealing here with impairment, which is caused by a variety of factors, and it's already a challenge that we're dealing with, and so we're just building upon an existing framework that way. We add cannabis to the open container law under the vehicle traffic law so that you can't consume cannabis inside a vehicle. We also allow for drug recognition expert evaluation to be admissible in trial. It's already admissible as evidence, but it's not formally recognized, and this will strengthen strengthen that trend by putting it in statute. And then we lower the barrier for law enforcement to obtain a warrant in order to perform a chemical test, meaning right now, if you're in an accident that causes death or serious injury, then the law allows law enforcement to obtain a warrant to see if you have any substances in your body, and we would lower that barrier in order to have that apply in other types of accidents as well. So, like I said, a fairly aggressive proposal when it comes to traffic safety to deal with that potential effect of legalization. We can move to that to the next slide.
So criminal justice. The governor's proposal legalizes possession of up to 1 ounce of plant material or 5 grams of concentrated cannabis or a equivalent amount, looking at other forms of products in terms of edibles or topicals and tinctures and things like that, which would be set in regulation by the Office of Cannabis Management. And this would guide what the transaction limits would be through any dispensary at any given time for a customer. There's a penalty framework that's restructured to avoid the criminalization that has been seen in other jurisdictions through prohibition. We reduce the penalties for possession and sale and shift to a more administrative approach for what would be non-compliant and unlicensed activity. We still do have penalties for sales to minors to make sure that no one is trying to divert to minors or to youth, but we have very, very strong tax compliance provisions and administrative remedies for anyone who is operating outside the regulated system. So the CRTA contains provisions to expedite criminal record review and reclassification, which was something that was passed 2 years ago to make sure that those that were either arrested or prosecuted for actions that now would be legal can have that remedied and no longer have that impact their lives. And then the penalties for minors have been adjusted to make sure that they're equivalent to the penalties for underage alcohol consumption so that we have parity there. The public consumption framework is in line with the Clean Indoor Air Act and also is in line and synced with what we have in terms of tobacco use and other use of smoking and burning in public, which would not be allowed. We also include different mechanisms to target illicit cultivation as opposed to the penal code. We're not trying to recriminalize any actions here, but making sure that we have strong repercussions for those that are trying to continue to operate outside the regulated system.
And so as you can see, we're touching on a lot of topics, but these all have to do with the impact of legalizing. And so there are a lot of different areas which are impacted. And over the last several years, we've been dealing with, on this one, for example, protections for the use of cannabis and workplace safety with chambers of commerce. We've been dealing with various stakeholders, employers, groups, to try to find a middle ground here to protect individuals that are legally consuming and protect employers' ability to make sure that their workplace is safe and that people aren't consuming or impaired at work. So on the one side, we prohibit unlawful discrimination. So you can't refuse to, a school or landlord may refuse to enroll or lease to a person for conduct that's allowed. So private consumption. There are protections for certified patients, those already exist, and protections for parolees to remove drug use from the criminal justice system. From a workplace safety standpoint, we found and we're pointed to Labor Law 201D, and we mirror that, which essentially lays out a framework for employer policies and substance use generally. This is a road that's been well traveled for alcohol and other substances. So there are a set of protocols and protections and trade-offs and balances between the employer and the employees. Employers will be allowed to establish policies that prohibit cannabis use. That's still within their powers, as long as those policies are uniformly applied to all workers. And you can certainly still test for cannabis use in pre-employment hiring situations if you're in a safety sensitive position. And of course, you can always take action if there's any suspicion of impairment by following the right protocols. So we think we've struck a fairly solid balance here, and that we will be able to protect on that front. And then this is a good one for Norm.
The public health and education campaigns are one of the utmost priorities for the administration. The office will be establishing robust prevention and public education campaigns and public health monitoring surveys as well. And so this is something that we're already developing and are looking to implement immediately to make sure that we have appropriate baseline data. Unfortunately, the survey and monitoring data that we get from federal agencies does not ask questions that are appropriate for today's market, for today's use. So they are very superficial, and if you do not obtain good baseline data and have ongoing mechanisms to collect information on use trends and have good public education campaigns, you don't know what message you should be putting out there, and you're not sure how your policies are going to result because you didn't know what was happening before you had a commercialized industry. So we will be implementing and evaluating evidence-based prevention education programs that make sure that youth are properly educated about the dangers and potential repercussions of cannabis use. We will be developing and implementing standards for regulating characteristics of legal cannabis products that may appeal to children, whether that's in the shape, the form, the flavor, the name, the packaging. We'll be restricting advertising and the promotion of these products to make sure that no one is targeting at-risk communities, particularly children, and those that we know are the highest users of other potentially habit-forming products, and lessons that we've learned from tobacco and alcohol and other regulated industries, with a particular attention not just to children but also to pregnant and breastfeeding women, with very specific education campaigns to make sure that they're getting the information that they need. Something else that we'll be doing is a employee training program for those that are working in dispensaries and in retail establishments, so that they know what the proper way to describe and or advertise products is, and that they're not making any unfounded claims to consumers, which is an issue that we've seen in other states and that we've also seen adequately rectified through mandatory training and certification of staff. It's a good way for us to make sure that we have a good control over the messaging, the advertising, the information, not just that is being broadcast outside to the public at large, but also within the walls of these establishments and our licensees. And then we'll also be doing this in cooperation with regional partners. We have robust communication and ongoing discussions with neighboring states and different associations to make sure that we're coordinating on our policies to protect public health and safety, whether that's through advertising and packaging or public awareness campaigns, public health monitoring and surveillance, or testing requirements and other product requirements to make sure that we don't have a regional race to the bottom, because we are in a very different place in the country in terms of density of population and the ease in which you can wake up in one jurisdiction and commute to another or to several other all before lunchtime. So we have great conversations with our partners here in the region and also other jurisdictions across the country. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Norman and Axel, for that very informative presentation. Thank you again to the Majority Leader for taking time out of a very busy schedule to join us as the Assembly sponsor of the Legislature's proposal to legalize adult use cannabis. We do have some time left for Q&A, which we're very excited about. We're happy to have Axel and Norm still on the line with us, and we also have the Majority Leader's Legislative Director, Paul Nixon, available to answer questions. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel of the webinar dashboard, and we'll answer as many as we have time for today. This first question we received is for the whole group. Have the governor and legislature reached an agreement on whether to allow home cultivation? And if not, can both sides please explain where they stand on the issue?
So I'm happy to jump in. This is Norman. That is still a topic for discussion. We've had some great preliminary conversations with the legislature, but we have 4 or 5 more weeks here, and that's something that I'm sure we'll get to. The governor's proposal does not include home grow provisions, and this reflects lessons that have been learned in other jurisdictions. Home grow is very, very difficult to regulate. It is often equated with the brewing of beer or wine, which is legal on the alcohol side, but they're very, very different processes. You're not using electrical equipment, HVAC, compressed flammable gas solvents. You're not taking alcohol or beer and then condensing it into a higher form of alcohol, which would be illegal because you can't run a still in your home. And then when you look at the market dynamics, there are very different demands for making their own home beer or wine as opposed to someone who's growing plants, which could be yielding anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds per harvest, 3 to 4 harvests a year. So when you look at all of that, when you consider the fact that homegrown cannabis has contributed to the participation of criminal enterprises in other jurisdictions, that it's not subject to packaging or labeling or laboratory testing for mold and microbial and pesticides, and that it can and has in other markets undercut the regulated, safer structures that states are putting in. This is something that we don't think should be coming online initially. I think we're open to conversations and talking about if it's appropriate to phase it in as a later date. But initially speaking, it's not something that was included in the governor's proposal as it stands today. But we look forward to discussing with our colleagues in the legislature.
Thank you. If Mr. Nixon doesn't have anything to add, we'll move on to the next question. What are the benefits or incentives for towns to allow retail, cultivators, processors to be established within their town?
Axel, do you want to jump in on this one, or would you like me to take it?
Go ahead. Sorry, I missed it. So if you don't mind, go for it.
Oh, no problem. So the benefits of allowing for licensed activities. Well, there are a couple. We talked about the economic benefits in terms of job creation and what that can do for tax base. Aside from the retail tax mechanisms that we have in place this year, the mechanisms that we have now apply the existing sales tax to any retail sale, and utilizing that same distribution of sales tax revenue to counties and then municipalities within the county's jurisdiction. So there's a benefit from economic development standpoint, there's a benefit from a tax base standpoint, and then there's a benefit in terms of displacing the illicit market. We have a very robust illicit market here in New York, just like everyone does across the country. Prohibition has not changed that. So there's a benefit to converting the existing use and demand over to regulated means so that it can be properly regulated. We can educate consumers about risky activities around cannabis use and how to use as responsibly as possible. And then with the additional revenue for the locality, there's also additional revenue for the state, which then helps because it goes back into those public education campaigns, the public monitoring in surveillance of health data, the DRE and traffic provisions that we have, which will impact state, county, and local law enforcement officials. So there's really a bunch of benefits to embracing the industry and allowing it to participate within your jurisdiction.
Thank you very much, Norm. Paul, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, yes, Paul Nixon here. Actually, yeah, I agree with Norm. There certainly are many benefits to opting to allow the industry to flourish in communities, as Norm mentioned. So I just do agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is again for you, Mr. Nixon. The majority leader's proposal includes a different taxation scheme than the governor's executive budget proposal. Is the legislature supportive of making adult use cannabis sales subject to local sales tax?
So the majority leader's proposal, it is different than the governor's, and we are certainly open to discussion and trying to come to a consensus. I would note that in our proposal, there would be a local ability to obtain tax revenues, 1% to counties and 3% to towns, city, or villages that are, engaged in the cannabis retail sale. But yes, we're certainly open to discussion and happy to take any feedback as to what anybody thinks makes sense.
Thank you. I'll add that NISAC has been very supportive of the taxation scheme the governor has proposed, which would impose a local sales tax on adult use cannabis sales in addition to the other taxes imposed on retail sales. The next question we received is what type of restrictions will be placed on cultivation license holders? The questioner continues that these requirements will determine whether cultivators will be zoned industrial or agricultural, and this is a big difference for local government's approach to zoning.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's not specifically addressed, and I think therefore it would fall into proper agricultural zoning. And I know that a lot of farmers have expressed a desire to make sure that that happens. Right now, we do permit counties to opt out of growing licenses. So to the extent that folks don't want growers in their county, they can opt out of that. But if you don't opt out of it, you can't treat this differently than other crops. And to the extent that a jurisdiction or locality is zoned agricultural, then it would be able to they would be able to farm cannabis there as well.
And I think just to add from the legislature perspective, in the MRTA, the opt-out is different than the governor's structure. It's an opt-out at the city, town, village level, and it's opting out of retail sales rather than the other aspects of the industry. And the MRTA really treats cannabis like any other crop. So the intention is that the right to farm laws and rules and regulations would really apply to cannabis as any other farming activity.
And one note from an operational standpoint, and it doesn't relate to zoning, but there are typically restrictions that are put in place that we have now in the medical program that exist in all adult use jurisdictions around security requirements, surveillance camera requirements to make sure that everything is properly monitored and accounted for, the use of a seed to sale inventory tracking system that tracks the product from its entire life cycle, from being a seed or a seedling all the way through manufacturing and harvest to final packaging, and then the point of sale at retail, for indoor cultivation, odor mitigation requirements, so things like that. So one thing to look out for before towns take action on any license class is to look at any proposed regulations to see how that might influence decisions based off the state requirements around any concerns that you might have locally.
We have a couple of questions about traffic and workplace safety. This next question asks, in speaking of traffic safety or workplace safety, how do you determine impairment at a traffic stop when THC stays in someone's system for a longer period of time and one may test positive due to consumption from more than a week or so ago?
This is a great question. And one of the things that we've drilled down on is the difference between a THC metabolite and active THC within someone's system. And these are two different things. And you're absolutely correct to say that someone with a slow base metabolic rate could have a metabolite in their system for as long as 30 days. But that's not true for active THC. And so because of these discrepancies and because we do not have a established volume limit per blood content like what we have with alcohol, the governor's approach really relies on drug recognition experts and law enforcement and their training. There are states that have per se limits, typically around 5 nanograms of THC, active THC within someone's blood, but that is not necessarily a good indicator of whether someone is actually impaired or not. And so we have law enforcement that has comprehensive training. They've been on the road, they're experienced, and they spent their careers recognizing when there's impairment or not, regardless of what the substance is. And so we really lean on that law enforcement expertise and in investing to make sure that we have more drug recognition experts. While that happens, though, the proposal also mandates a pilot program for us to investigate, where is the quote unquote breathalyzer equivalent, so that we can look at these new technologies. And there's some that analyze oral fluid, there's some that analyze breath, there are some that analyze other bodily fluids, and there are different pilot programs throughout North America and Canada and in the US that we're looking at. And this would put the state in a position to be able to conduct those trials, and it would create a framework where when we do reach that standard and have that technology, it could be adopted and then deployed into the field for law enforcement to use.
Thank you. We'll take time for a few more questions and we'll try to end by 10 after here. The next question we received is, will there be any additional funding from the state to help counties with public health and safety functions associated with adult use cannabis?
Well, so we are setting aside a significant amount of money when it comes to a public health campaign. We have the authority to do that and to use the revenue in both the MRTA and the CRTA towards that initiative. Already, there's a couple of ways in which this works out. There's the public health campaign just on purely public health issues, underage use, warning on the side on the products, just general education as well. And then there's public safety on the traffic safety committee that the governor currently runs through the localities. And so there's already a process whereby local jurisdictions that participate in the traffic safety committee submit budgets that get approved for to counter issues that they're confronting or initiatives that they're engaged in. And so that can be a vehicle that would be used in order to address this as a new area when it comes to education and traffic safety education. Well, from a broader public health standpoint, I think we've always considered the local health departments to be partners in rolling out that kind of initiative. So the details of that initiative haven't been worked out yet, but there is certainly going to be a significant budget dedicated to that effort, and we expect that will be shared with the appropriate agencies in order to implement it. And finally, I think I'd raise the tax revenue do contemplate using tax revenue for grants to local health departments to implement substance use disorder initiatives, mental health initiatives, and various other reentry, job replacement. So there are several mechanisms through which the revenue will be shared.
And this is Paul Nixon. I'll just add on to Axel and Norm's comments. With the MRTA, we also recognize DRE at the moment is the mechanism to determine impairment with driving. So the legislation does have funds that come off the top for DRE training to localities. So, potentially counties could access funds through, I guess, the state police to train their sheriffs or law enforcement to become DREs. So that could potentially be a nice benefit. And our community reinvestment structure could potentially have grants going to local governments for the various social purposes laid out in the legislation.
That's a great point on the DREs, Paul. That's absolutely right. We are earmarking money as well for DREs in order to, as Norm said, that's really our bulk, our biggest approach to handling driver safety. And so there are funds tied to that as well. So there are multiple ways in which this is happening. That's a great point.
Thank you. We'll take one or two more questions here. The next one, is the establishment of hours similar to liquor stores, which are set at the county level, or will it be zoning at the town level?
I believe the plan is time, place, and manner. So you will, there is a standard of reasonableness, I believe, that would apply, but each locality would have the ability to set the time for opening up the stores.
The next question, somebody wrote in that they can see their township losing money in property taxes because they have large farm areas and residential areas growing. But if the farms grow marijuana, hemp home builders have already stated that they would cease further development. What could townships do in this situation?
Well, I mean, one of the first thing to distinguish is hemp is already legal, and it's legal at the federal level, and so it immediately qualifies for protection as a crop under agriculturally zoned areas, and so there isn't anything you can do about that now. The adult use or medical is different than hemp in that you don't grow nearly the same quantity as a field crop. There are some outdoor grows. We're considering allowing some outdoor grows, but for the most part, people will be growing either indoor or in sophisticated greenhouses. In the medical program, for example, everybody grows indoor. And so I think the smell mitigation, the security that Norm was talking about, just the fact that folks are going to be a lot more cognizant of it being an adult use program. It might be an issue, but we don't expect it to be as significant an issue as hemp, and it'll have a better track record than hemp does, which is already sort of the cat's out of the bag on that one. So I'm not sure this is going to contribute significantly to that issue.
We've also seen, particularly in the Northeast, looking at the experience of Massachusetts, kind of a completely different impact from these licensees going into communities. If you look into some of the mill towns in northern Massachusetts, in Lowell and Haverhill, if you look at some of the old kind of artisan towns, Northampton out west, close to the New York border, mayors there have opened their arms and invited in cannabis operators because they're taking old industrial buildings and mill buildings and buildings that used to be used for manufacturing that have been boarded up for decades, and they're retrofitting them to be able to do manufacturing and cultivation there. And because of the odor mitigation, security, everything else, they're actually improving property values and tax bases within the town or within the city. So we're seeing a bit of the opposite happening in fact in other states.
Thank you. The next question, will financial assistance still be available to counties that opt out of any of these licenses?
So the opt-out doesn't affect the collection of the sales tax. and there's no plan on the DRE, for example, or the grant writing that I know of. Well, it's too early to tell on the tax revenue grants from the fund on what the conditions for that grant process will be. But when it comes to sales tax and when it comes to well, sales tax you'll lose out if you don't have a retail location, obviously. But when it comes to DREs and public health, that's going to be a statewide effort, and we're not planning on singling out jurisdictions that opt out. But certainly, you'll lose your tax revenue if you opt out.
We'll end with a question for the whole group here. We expect that most adult use cannabis sales will happen in the population centers of the state, but how do we make sure that our rural counties, where the majority of cannabis will presumably be grown, don't get left behind? Could the state share a portion of cultivation tax or another tax associated with the agricultural side of adult use cannabis with the counties where cannabis is grown?
So the way that we have approached the licensing, and obviously this is all subject to the office and the control board, the oversight board, the 5-member board that will be appointed. But it's that we do not want there to be pockets where you do not have access to regulated cannabis, because then the illicit market continues to thrive. And that's bad for public health, public safety, local revenue, state revenue, and all the different programs we've been discussing here. So, the thought is whatever the limit will be in terms of retail establishments, to make sure that that is dispersed across the state as uniformly as possible based off of local demands. So it should not be a licensing regime where, 90% of these licenses are on, the island of Manhattan. There is envisioned to be geographic dispersion to make sure that there's access throughout the entirety of the state. Again, subject to local opt-out. If you get an entire portion of the state where all the localities opt out, then you might, get into that type of situation. But it won't be something that's driven by the operators through the licensing process.
Mr. Nixon, did you have anything to add before we close out?
I appreciate Norm's comments, and I would just add that the demand for cannabis is certainly statewide, and we would also fully support, an effort to make sure that there are no pockets of inaccessibility. So just reiterate what Norm said. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our sponsor again, Ease Technologies LLC, for sponsoring this session. And I also want to extend sincerest thanks to all of our guests today, the Honorable Crystal People-Stokes, Paul Nixon from her office, her legislative director, and Axel Burnaby and Norm Bayerbaum from the governor's office. We sincerely appreciate you sharing your time with us and answering our members' questions on this policy that will certainly impact county governments. We really appreciate all of you joining us today for this session. You can check back tomorrow for a copy of the recording and the slide deck on our website. We hope you will all join us for the rest of our legislative conference workshops. The next one will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. on artificial intelligence. Take care.